Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. Today let's talk about making hats on a knitting loom. Traditionally, we knit the complete hat as a tube, then gather the top of that tube in to form the crown. It works fine, but it does create some gathers and bulk at the crown. If you want to reduce it, here's one method that you can use. I am knitting a child's hat here. I'm using an older Decor Accents loom. This is quite similar to the all-in-one loom by Authentic Knitting Board, which I would actually be using right now if I did not have another project on it. But I just want you to be aware that this same process may be used on any loom, in particular that one. I'm going to start, well, first of all, I have started by knitting most of the hat. Down here is the hem, which I'm going to give another treatment in a little bit. Here's the body of the hat. Now I'm approaching the crown, and I'm going to show you a technique to make the crown a little bit smoother with great ease. First of all, we're going to transfer every other stitch to the neighboring needle. It's important, in order to accomplish this technique properly, that you have not knitted overly tightly, because if you have, it's going to be very difficult to manage. I knitted this in what is usually called the U-stitch. It's a version of flat stitch, but in it I have pulled my stitches a little bit more around each needle than just flat, so that they enlarged slightly, and I do have another video that describes this. So right now we're reducing the number of stitches that will actually be in work by transferring every other stitch to the neighboring needle. And afterwards we're not going to use the empty needles anymore. To do a really good job of this, you really need to have a loom that has an even number of needles. This one is set up to do that. A lot of the nifty knitters are set up with odd numbers of needles. But don't despair, that doesn't mean you can't do it on a nifty knitter. Because we're gathering in the crown, if you leave two stitches next to one another, which is what you're going to have to do if you have an odd number to work with, it's really not going to make a ruinous or even a very noticeable difference to the look. It's just ideal if you have every other needle all the way around in work, which in this case we do. There we go. Alright, let's begin knitting the next row. I see I did a little boo-boo here. I need my yarn tail not to be caught under that stitch, which it was. Now, I'm going to go behind the empty needles. Let me try to turn this so you can see better. Well, you're going to have to see on the next one because I can't get an angle that I like. I'm going to very loosely weave in and out around the working needles. The out should be around a working needle, in or not around an empty needle, and so on. Yeah. And the effect that I am getting is that there are going to be 3 loops on every needle that actually has something going on. That's because there was one stitch, I transferred another stitch, and now I'm wrapping. Once I'm all the way around, we will knit the 2 bottom loops over the newly wrapped loop. There's no reason I have to go all the way around. I could stop right now and knit some of these over if I wanted to. It does not matter if you do what I'm doing here and knit both lower loops over at one time, or if you knit them over one at a time, as long as you do knit both over before you leave each needle or peg. Sometimes they're a little bit stiff to knit over together, and that's why you might find knitting it over one at a time is a bit easier. Okay, when I have finished knitting all the way around, I'm going to come back and see you. I think you understand this. I've been all the way around. I've knitted over on every needle that's still working. And now I'm going to wrap another row, loosely going in and out, with the outs always being on the needles that already have stitches. The way you know how many rows that you want to work like this is just a simple rule of thumb. The last 1 to 2 inches of the top of the hat are what should be done on every other needle. This is stockinette knitting with worsted weight yarn, and I get about 4 stitches and 6 rows per inch of knitting. That's with every needle in work. The effect of every other in work tends to be to lengthen the rows a little bit. So I figure if I use 6 rows, it will be a little more than 1 inch of knitting. And that'll be what I want. I'm going to start with my last needle and knit over to lock everything in place. Now, if you have trouble getting these stitches loose enough, you may want to go in and out 1 or 2 or 3 needles at a time rather than all the way around. What's so bad about not getting them loose enough? In this case, did you see I dropped a wrap and I just lifted it back into position and went on? What's bad about not getting loose enough is that this knitting over process will become very difficult. It'll be hard on the needles, hard on your hands, and the knitting will be unnecessarily tight. In fact, it'll be downright difficult to manage. So you do not want to get it overly tight. This is row 2. After this I'll have 4 more rows, and then we'll bind off. After that, I have a different sort of hem treatment planned, and that will be a separate video that you might want to watch. Let's make sure we get this one on the very end. That's the trickiest one. There we go. I'm ready to wrap again. I'm going to go ahead and wrap and hook over my next 4 rows, and I'll see you when I'm done. I have completed all 6 of the rows using every other needle. You can see the fabric changing if you look down in there. Let me turn it here and there so that you can get a better look. You might wonder what is the point, and the point is having less fabric at the crown where we gather it so that it won't be so bulky. Now I'm going to start binding off, really just gathering off. I don't have a yarn needle handy, so I'm using an alternate method of binding off that does the same exact thing as picking up the stitches with a yarn needle. I'm knitting each stitch and then pulling the yarn tail that I've already snipped through it. That dumps it right off of its needle and gathers it onto the previous stitch. It's a little slower, but it's faster than running back upstairs to find my yarn needle, which is goodness knows where at the moment. Do you have that problem? I must have invested in hundreds of yarn needles over the course of my career, and I suppose when I'm dead and somebody's cleaning out my house, they will discover a trove of them somewhere or many somewheres. But I can't seem to keep up with them. Let's have a look at the progress. Now you can really see how the stitches changed. There is another way to get a less bulky crown, not invented by me. I believe the inventor's name is Jeannie Phillips, and it involves knitting and purling so that half of the stitches in the crown area face into the hat and half face out, and her method is just gorgeous. I would never suggest that this is really as good as that, but it's pretty good, and I do think that this way is faster. So it's nice to know more than one way to do things. Sometimes you're in more of a hurry than others. Sometimes detail really counts. One nice thing about this method of binding off, or gathering off is what it really is, you absolutely know that you've caught every stitch. Sometimes with the yarn needle you move too quickly and you think you've got one, but you kind of miss it. Last stitch. Pull it through. This one got caught, but I'll just lift it off. And let's draw in the top. See how that works? There's significantly less bulk up here at the top than there would be if we had left every stitch in work. You can see where the change occurs, and let me lay the hat down. It is about the right place to shape the crown. Just make it start curving towards the top of the head. So there's just an alternative for you. Happy knitting, and bye now.